Good afternoon and hello, everyone. My name is Rich Longo, your host, as always, of Flycast Partners, and welcome to another Flycast Partners webcast. I would like to thank you for joining us on the topic of level management, service level management, properly setting up and utilizing. Presented none other than Flycast Partners' very own Kyle Hamilton. Now, Kyle is a senior SE here at Flycast Partners. He's been with us for a very long time. And has been in the IT space for well over 30 years. I know he's cringing when I say that. His experience and firsthand knowledge in business service management, sales, network automation, ITIL processes, asset management, knowledge management, IT service management, and more certifications than I can even keep track of. He has been instrumental in helping organizations, both large and small, both government and private sector, assess and map out their IT processes and solutions. His experience has allowed him to take that holistic approach and make recommendations to increase efficiency, security, and save on those hard-earned budget dollars. Before we get started, let me introduce Flycast Partners. Flycast offers best-in-class implementation services and training in IT service management, IT asset management, IT operations management, enterprise service management, and workload automation spaces, all using ITIL best practice. Our organization, all throughout North America, has close to 1,600 customers now. We have grown so much, very loyal customers, and we invite you to take a look at what we offer. Our professional services team has well over 5,600 professional services engagements on site and remote. And we encourage you to reach out to us at 844-FLYCAST. That's 844-359-2278. Or you can chat with us live, 8:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We have IT experts standing by. They cannot wait to chat with you, answer questions. That's what they live for, folks. So don't let them hang, leave them hanging out there. Or you can email us at info@flycastpartners.com. During today's presentation, I encourage you to please type your questions in. Kyle will be answering all your questions live during our presentation today, so type those questions in. He'll answer them. I want to remind all of those of you that aren't aware, it is Flycast Partners' 10 years of existence. And in celebration, we have a couple raffles going on. I encourage you to go to our website and sign up for a weekly raffle. Can win a 25-watt high-quality Bluetooth speaker, pretty nice speakers, by the way. Or you can win on our grand prize, if you're a current customer, a $500 lunch for you and your teammates. So go to our website, folks, sign up for the raffles and participate. Each week we have a winner on the weekly raffle. And at the end of July, we will have one grand prize winner for the $500 lunch. And I'm so excited to be able to give that away. So don't forget to type your questions in, and as we get started today, we're going to start out today's presentation with a poll. So let me throw this poll up there for you. We're going to ask the question, do you currently use service level agreements? And go ahead and take some time and answer that for us. We'll give you a minute or so. Wow, so far we've got quite a few of you that are I guess about 60% so far are saying yes. Give it a couple more seconds here. Oh, it's evening out a little bit. So do you use service level agreements? Pretty important thing. Got about 60% of you have voted. Here we go. We can get the rest of you guys to vote. Let's see how folks that are out, your peers out there, how they are conducting business or how they're doing things with their IT day to day. Oh, 75% are saying yes so far. We've got 70% of you voting. Let's give it another couple seconds here and see if we can't get some more votes in. Do you currently use service level agreements in your organization? We're still sitting at 70%. All right, we'll give it about 5 more seconds. Get those votes in, folks. Get those votes in for us. All right, and it looks like that is the end of our poll. So I'm going to share with you the results today. You should see on your screen, we have 72% of you said, yes, you do in fact have service level agreements. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Kyle and let him go down that road about service level agreements.
Well, I want to first of all welcome everybody to today's webinar. As Richard mentioned, my name is Kyle Hamilton. I'm a sales engineer with Flycast Partners. Here to talk today a little bit about setting up service level agreements properly, and how you want to go about architecting and the best way to utilize these, as well as some gotchas and tricks and traps. So I'm going to start off first talking a little bit about the architecture, setting up service level agreements properly, or using service level management properly. Keeping in mind, I'm going to show just a couple of screens today, just to illustrate, some of the reporting and some of the metrics around service level management that you may be looking for, or the reason behind using them in the first place. However, keep in mind that the principles that I'm going to talk about today can be applied regardless of the platform you're on, the vendor you're tied to, or the product you're using. So hopefully there'll be something for everybody to take away, regardless of what tool you might be looking at or utilizing today. So in talking about properly setting up service level agreements, the first thing to think about is your end goal, obviously, and that's reflected in, and I want to talk a little bit about things like the dashboard here that you see up in front of you. Is the ability to report on, are you meeting those commitments to your customers, to your users that you've promised? Are you resolving those issues in the time frame that you've designated or agreed to? So that being the ultimate goal, you want to make sure that you've set up those targets and you've set those goals appropriately. And that's one of the first things that I've found over and over throughout my years, is that there is a tendency to overpromise and underdeliver, as opposed to the opposite. Everybody wants to make it sound like you can do things a lot quicker than you can, and that has a tendency to impact the reports and your metrics when it comes to service level agreements. And a lot of that stems from the fact that a vast majority of time, you're not taking into account all of the elements that need to be rolled into that agreement. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So when we're talking about an SLA, per the ITIL definition, is between you and your customer, or you and the user. You're promising that customer, we'll handle this, or we'll, resolve your issue, we'll deal with your request within X amount of time. But within that SLA, you also have what's referred to as OLAs and underpinning contracts. Those are really just different SLAs, different naming, but the same type of thing. But when we're talking about an OLA would be between, say, IT and the security department or facilities. So and I'll use the common example of an onboarding, employee onboarding process, something that involves, a lot of departments. You got security for, key cards and, building access. You've got IT, of course, for setting up accounts and provisioning operating systems and applications and things of that nature. You've got HR that's got to get, employee IDs and things of that nature. So in that instance, your operating level agreements, those OLAs, exist between the departments. So you have an SLA with your customer, that's the forward-facing agreement, but then internally, you've got to work, IT has to work with HR, and HR has to work with facilities, and facilities has to work with security in order to make that onboarding process smooth. And that's where the OLA comes in, is you have to have agreements between those departments and groups to understand the time frame of that service delivery. Because if you're going to promise to the end user, we can resolve or deal with your request or issue within this time frame, you have to fully understand how much time it's going to take you internally in all those interdepartmental interactions to get everything done. If it's going to take you, a week to get the facilities, the cubicle and the space set up, and it's going to take you, another 2 or 3 days to get the equipment configured and in place, get all the accounts created. All of those things have to be taken into account when you're setting up that service level agreement with that end user. Now that's the first piece. So that's just we talked about the agreement with the customer. Then you've got your OLAs, your agreements with, within the organization, interdepartmental. And then you've also got what's referred to as underpinning contracts. So an underpinning contract is another agreement, but it's between you and an external party, an external vendor like IBM or Dell. So if somebody's providing hardware, as a part of that onboarding process, of course, you need to order a new PC, laptop, desktop, what have you. The timing that it takes to get that PC or that underpinning contract that you have with Dell as that hardware vendor, you have to understand how much time it's going to take them to get that hardware to you so that that can be factored into the agreement with the customer as well. So ultimately, your service level agreement should be, the additive result of your OLAs. So whatever time it takes for facilities to do their work, and whatever time it takes IT to get their stuff done, and whatever time it takes HR to get their piece done, as well as how much time it's going to take Dell, or how much time it's going to take IBM or Cisco, or whatever the case may be, so that when you define that SLA with your end user, with that customer, you've allocated all the time within it to accommodate for the vendor response, to accommodate for facilities to do their thing, and for HR and security, et cetera, to do theirs. And that's the first key, is making sure that you have accommodated within the SLA all the time frame, all the times that it's going to take for each of those groups to perform their requisite actions. In many cases, I've found where, I've seen service level agreements built where, if we stick with the onboarding example, the SLA shows that they're going to onboard an employee within 2 weeks. But then when you look at, say, I'm not picking on Dell, but just a common example. Say Dell is the hardware provider. If Dell's going to take 2 weeks to be able to guarantee you that you can get the hardware within that time frame, it's impossible for you to onboard that employee in 2 weeks. If Dell takes every last minute that they have allocated to them, which is 2 weeks, then there's absolutely no way that you can then guarantee that you can onboard that employee in 2 weeks if you get that PC or desktop or laptop, what have you, delivered at the very last minute. Because then you've got to do the accounts, you've got to set up all the security and everything else that may be dependent upon the delivery of that hardware. So those are important, things to keep in mind when you're building the SLA to begin with, because you don't want to set yourself up for failure to start. You want to make sure that if everybody within that chain, if facilities takes the maximum amount of time, and IT takes the max amount of time, and Dell takes the max amount of time, how much does that add up to? That's your service level agreement. That's what you can commit to, is if everything takes the longest amount of time it can, this is when you'll have your employee onboarded. You hope that it's faster, but that's what you can commit to. Now, the reason I mentioned the construction of the SLA is because frequently what I find is customers will ask about things like stop the clock features, right? They want to use some kind of status, within the ticket to be able to put things in a pause state. And very frequently, that's because they want to pause that SLA because they're waiting. They say, well, I'm waiting on a vendor, or I'm waiting on the customer, or I'm waiting on some response, something that's out of your control, for sure. But it's something that should be anticipated and built into that SLA to begin with, right? So I guess to put it shortly, I personally have, in my experience, I've never had a valid example for a reason to use a stop the clock feature. I would love if somebody has one, please feel free to submit it via the chat. I'm always open and hoping somebody proves me wrong. But to date, I've never had a valid reason for ever using any kind of stop the clock feature. And the reason I say that is because, well, let's take the example with the onboarding and Dell. So customer wants to stop the clock because they're waiting on the delivery of the hardware, right? They can't complete the onboarding process because Dell hasn't delivered the PC yet. So they don't want to breach their onboarding SLA. So they want to stop that clock and put in a waiting for a vendor state or something so that everything gets paused. But in reality, what ends up happening is you end up, the only person, or say the only entity that you're helping in that situation is Dell. Because ultimately what you want to do with your service level agreements is be able, and this goes back to the it's okay to fail premise on this webinar, is that it's okay for you to get those red lights on the tickets. It's okay for things to show that they've breached the SLA. There's just a natural psychological tendency. People don't like to see red X's. They don't like to see, red stoplights and things like that. And so they want to stop things so that everything stays in the green. But those red lights and those breaches help pinpoint the problematic areas that need to be addressed. And in the case of the onboarding example, when you take, in that case, if we're talking about Dell as an external vendor, that would be an underpinning contract that I have with Dell that says, Dell's, when I order hardware, you're going to deliver the hardware to me within a 2-week time frame. And that's going to be, part of our contract. That way I can build that 2 weeks into my SLA, so that if it's going to take Dell 2 weeks to deliver the PC, it's probably going to take me at least 3 weeks, somewhere maybe 4, to get that employee onboarded. If I've got to wait 2 weeks just to get the hardware, maybe less. But I want to take that into account. And if I go in and I use that stop the clock feature because I'm waiting on Dell to deliver the hardware, then that means that I didn't account for that 2 weeks when I originally built the SLA in the first place. Because if that 2 weeks is built into the service level agreement, then if Dell takes 2 weeks, that's fine. That's the worst case scenario, but that's already built into the SLA that we've committed to with the customer. So we can still get everything done and meet our SLA, even if Dell takes that whole 2 week, span, to get the device to us. But if I've put that ticket or that request into a waiting for vendor state and I've paused that SLA, what I'm doing is suppressing the fact that Dell's not delivering, because ultimately, if I've said I'm going to onboard this employee in a month and I run reports or I pull up a dashboard at the end of the month and it shows, hey, we've breached the SLA for our onboarding process, 50% of the time, that might sound bad. But then if you also have the ability to drill down and say, well, the reason that we only met 50% of our service level agreement this month was because Dell, whom we have a contract with, didn't deliver the hardware within the 2 weeks that they allocate or we've allocated. It took them 3 weeks or 4 weeks. That highlights the problem that you need to perhaps go back to vendor management or purchasing and contracts and deal with Dell to make sure that they meet their commitments as a part of that underpinning contract so that you can meet your commitment to the customer in terms of the overall SLA. So typically, when I hear customers talk about putting things in a wait state or some kind of hold state, it's because the SLA isn't built properly. If you're having to put tickets and requests into a hold state, it's because that hold time, that wait time, wasn't identified or made a part of that service level agreement calculation. And in many cases, as in the case with that onboarding example, when you put that ticket in a hold state, what you're doing is you're making Dell look good in order to make the internal metrics look good. But really what you want is you want that clock to continue running. You want to let those requests breach or let that incident breach so that when it does, it bubbles to the top. Somebody is going to identify and see it. And then when they see it, then you can drill down and focus in on why did we breach this? Well, it's because the vendor's not meeting their commitment, or facilities is not able to get the office space configured within the timeframes they've said. So maybe that pinpoints the problems where you need to have additional discussions or maybe renegotiations with the vendor, or maybe you need to rework the SLA so that you don't have to use those stop the clock features. Because in almost all cases, when you're stopping that clock, you are burying the information that ultimately you really want. And that's to be able to pinpoint why you're not able to meet that SLA, whether that's because of an OLA with HR or some interdepartmental agreement, or whether that's because it's an external vendor and an underpinning contract. But in almost all cases, when I've seen that stop the clock feature referred to or utilized, it's typically all in an effort just to make sure that the dashboard's all in the green and everything's 100% met and nothing's been breached. But in more cases than not, the people that get helped out are outside of the ones that are actually delivering the report and worried about the metrics. It makes them look good, yes, but you're also helping that vendor, and you're also helping those other departments that might not be meeting their commitments. And those are the things that you want to try and not expose, but you want to make sure that those get filtered up so that you can, maybe you do need to renegotiate. Maybe there's some efficiencies that they need to get so that they can meet their agreements with you. But ultimately, you want those things. If you don't use the agreement in the right way, it doesn't allow that information to bubble up to a dashboard or to a report, because it's being suppressed with that stop the clock. And so every time, it more or less makes the reports kind of, washed, in the sense that if I get a report every, once a month for the next 5 years and it's 100% met every time, it kind of becomes, fades into the background. I stop paying attention to it. It's only in those cases where things start to go red and I start to see some indication that there are some problems that you can really pinpoint those problems. But oftentimes there's a natural tendency to want to suppress those so that everything looks good. But your best path is typically to uncover those things and fix them so that you're not having to use that stop the, even if you're using it today, there are things you can do through the reports and dashboards to be able to help eliminate that use, or at least mitigate it, so that over time you start relying less and less on pausing that clock or stopping that clock, because all of those factors have already been built in. And you want to make sure that that's the big advantage. There's no requirement. I don't know of any tool out there in the market today that requires you to set up, OLAs or underpinning contracts separately. Many of them will provide you with that capability, right? So we'll have a service level agreement form, and then they'll have typically sections for OLAs and underpinning contracts that you can attach to them. That'll kind of roll up so that you can see everything together. But there's no requirement that you have to do that. Many customers will simply set up one service level agreement, right? And it covers, whether it's 2 days or 2 weeks, and they don't worry about defining the OLA and the underpinning contracts with the vendor or with HR or IT. And that's okay. Just understanding that by defining and breaking that SLA down into those component parts, it gives you an additional level of granularity in your reports and in your dashboards, where you can break, you can pinpoint that problem. If I've got one SLA that just says, we'll onboard an new hire in 3 weeks, and that SLA fails, it's going to be difficult for me to go back into that without a lot of digging and detailed reporting to figure out what that reason was. Was it Dell? Was it HR? Was it facilities? Was it IT? Where was the shortfall? If I've got the OLA defined and I've got that underpinning contract with Dell defined, and so they exist as separate, agreements, and I've got then the ability to go in and say, well, the service level agreement failed, but I can see the failure was due to the underpinning contract with Cisco, or the underpinning contract with IBM, or it was the operating level agreement with facilities that drug us down. Now you know where to focus the efforts. Do we need to talk to the vendors? Do we need to change vendors? Do we need to renegotiate with facilities or HR to ensure that the service level agreement set up correctly and they can deliver what they promised? All of those things come about, through breaking those things down. So while you don't have to use or really even understand OLAs and underpinning contracts, those are important elements, even if you're not using them, to think about when you're building the SLA. Because a lot of times customers have a tendency to, look at the customer and say, well, we can do this, and if it's IT, they'll say, well, we can do this in 2 weeks, but they're not taking into account those delays from the vendor or the delays with security and the other groups. And so it's important to have those, at least have an understanding informally or formally with those departments, so that you can have proper service level agreement set up, so that you can have a dashboard that can show you, the different targets. How quickly do we need to respond? How quickly do we need to resolve, right, for certain types of issues, whether it's a end user request, may be different for VIP users, right? So you've got C-level executives that have issues that have a higher level of priority, a higher level of response and resolution time. Those are all the types of things that the service level agreements can help you understand and define. As again, here with the traffic lights, are we in the green? Are we nearing the breaching point? Have we breached those SLAs? and be able to look at those things not only from a high level perspective, but on a ticket by ticket perspective. So I know, is that clock that's attached to that ticket, which, this little reticle here indicates, there's an SLA for that ticket, so that users, when they're looking at those incidents or looking at those requests, can see what those commitments are. It's important not only to have them identified and agreed to, but for everybody to be able to understand what they are. How much time remains? Do I have 5 minutes? Do I have 10 minutes? And that's typically, within service level management, most of the tools will provide the capability to send out what I call milestone, reminders or tickler messages. So as, those SLAs are aging, you hit those points where you get 50% of the way through that time frame or 75% of the way, and you want to send a reminder and say, hey, just want to let you know, hey, you got 20 minutes left until the SLA breaches, or you got 5 minutes left until the SLA breaches. Whether that's going to one person, or whether, as it gets closer and closer to that SLA breaching, typically you start sending out the message to a broader audience to get it more exposure so that nothing falls through the cracks. Or in some cases, the SLAs can be used to take it out of that person's hands entirely. You may send them several reminder messages as that countdown nears, but then you may say, well, when we get to a certain point, if we're not getting any response, and we've already sent 3 or 4 emails letting them know, hey, you got 30 minutes, you got 20 minutes, you got 15. And if nothing's been done, then maybe we need to escalate it and reassign that request or that ticket to the manager or the director of operations or whatever the case may be. So those are all the typical types of things that can be driven through service level management. In most of your ITSM tools, aside from the reporting, is the ability to actually automate, the movement and the notification process around your tickets and your requests based on how much time left do we have. We've said we've got 3 weeks to do this or a month to do this. How far into that time are we? And at what point do we say, okay, we need more help, or we need more visibility, or we need to let somebody know that we're not gonna meet the commitment unless we get some assistance. So those are the types of things that service level management in general can provide. Is not only just the reporting and the dashboarding piece, but the ability to help you move those tickets and requests from user to user or group to group as those tickets age, as we know that, hey, we've only got 5 minutes left to respond, or we've got 1 day left to resolve this, and we're not even started on it yet. So that way in advance, you've got problems to deal with before you get to the breaching point, and before you have to start using things like stop the clock and things like that. So as a secondary, poll, just real quickly, Rich, if you'd throw that out, I guess we want to ask everybody, how many, we got the results of how many of you are using service level agreements. How many of you out there today use a stop the clock type feature?
All right, the poll is up. Do you stop the clock? Yes or no? Let's go ahead and vote. Right now, we've gotten 60% say no. Oh, let's see. We've got about a quarter of the audience has voted now, fastly going up to 30%. Oh, there's still quite a few people that do use stop the clock features.
Yeah, and again, everybody, I welcome, if you've got an example, if you think, hey, I've got a legitimate reason, please feel free. I love the conversation. It's just with most of the examples I've heard, it all comes back to that time that you're stopping isn't built into your SLA.
We are 40% of folks voted, and we're going to give this about another 20 seconds or so, let everybody have a chance to vote. So far, the no's still have it, though. The no's are still up there.
That's kind of looks like about almost the opposite of the first question, but about 70-30 one way and 70-30 the other for the stop the clock.
See, we're almost at 50%. We're going to give it another 10 seconds. The votes are still coming in. Oh, wow, the numbers are going back in the other direction now. We're 40% yes.
Yeah, a little bit more even. A little bit more even now.
Definitely, as people are voting, it's definitely changing. I'm very curious to see where this is going to end. All right, guys, we're going to end here in a second.
Sure. And while we're waiting on that, I'm done presenting in terms of topics for today, but I wanted to, again, for those, I mean, obviously we've got, close to, looks like half the audience is using that feature. So if anybody has any questions or comments, arguments, please feel free to throw those up.
And there are the final results from our poll. 42% yes, 58% no is where we're at. And that's a good portion of the audience voted. Now, it looks like we may have a question here. Let's pull up our questions. But what are the practical benefits of stop the clock? And this comes from Marcus.
The practical benefits? Well, I guess using that same example, the only benefit, again, in most cases that I found, is to the vendor or to the customer or whomever you're waiting on. When you're using that stop the clock, you're kind of bearing the fact that they're not responding. You need them, obviously, as a part of the process. You need that response, or you need them to do something within a particular time frame, whether it's a customer, a vendor, another department. And typically that stop the clock feature means that they're not meeting their agreement, and because they're not, we don't want it to show up on IT's dashboard as a SLA failure. And so you stop the clock to make sure that all the lights are green. But again, it kind of goes back to if you really want to uncover the problem, the cause for the failure, you have to let it fail. And that goes back to, it's okay to fail, is, the concept that it's okay for things to be red as long as there's a reason and you can identify it, and then you can address it and go after it to make sure that you correct it. Because otherwise, that's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more you use the stop the clock, the better off everybody looks. There's no reason to renegotiate the SLAs. There's no reason to recalculate the SLAs. Everything's good. It's all in the green. Every report, every dashboard shows every metric's being met. We're all good. But in reality, it's not. It's just being suppressed.
Folks, if you have more questions, we do have a couple minutes that Kyle can still answer some questions. While we're waiting for more questions to come in, I want to reiterate our 10-year anniversary, by the way. And I mentioned in the beginning, last week, our winner was Debbie from Nations Lending Corporation. I got a speaker going out to her. Along with in the box, you're not only just getting a speaker, I'm throwing some other goodies in there for you too. But definitely go to our website and sign up for our weekly raffle and then our grand prize raffle. We've had folks from all over North America win so far. Each week, we get a chance to draw a new name, so it's exciting. And for the grand prize raffle, that will be held at the end of the month, and it'll give you $500 to spend on you and your teammates. for lunch. So definitely want you to do that. And if you have any questions, put them in there. If you don't want to ask your questions to Kyle now, well, that's fine too. You can go ahead and chat with us on our website. We have folks standing by on our website, 8:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. They're happy to chat with you about just about any topic you can think of. It doesn't even have to be IT related. You can talk about training, you can talk about support. We are a support provider for multiple tools in North America, North American-based support. I want to emphasize that. The majority of our folks being here in Florida, actually, that are providing the support. And we do provide remote administration services. We provide, a lot of those folks are in Colorado, and we have a plethora of different professional services we can offer your organization, so keep that in mind. You can email us at info@Flycast Partners or call us at 844-FLYCAST. That's 844-359-2278. Kyle, doesn't look like anybody else has got any more questions about the topic.
Okay, well, I want to say I appreciate everybody's time. Thanks for listening today and joining us. We'd love to see you back in the future, and I wish everybody have a great day.
That's right. Thank you folks so much for joining us today. We know that everybody's super, super busy, and we want to remind you that those of you that joined today, as a thank you from us, we are going to be sending you a $10 gift card from Domino's. Domino's will send you a gift card, $10 gift card, as long as you work within IT and are not some IT consultant working for a third party or something of that nature. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up today's presentation, and everyone stay safe.